Today, we're diving into the single most destructive conflict in all of human history, World War II. So let's just start with a number that really sets the stage for the unbelievable scale of what we're talking about. Over 70 million lives lost. It's a figure so huge it's almost impossible to really wrap your head around, but that was the human cost of the war we're about to break down. So how on earth did the world get to that point? Well, to really understand the Second World War, you have to go back. You have to look at all the anger and the chaos that the first one left behind. Okay, so the Treaty of Versailles, the deal that ended World War I, was supposed to bring peace. But for Germany, it was a disaster. It brought humiliation and total economic collapse. The country was slammed with these insane reparation payments. Its military was basically dismantled, and a runaway hyperinflation made people's life savings completely worthless. This created a powder keg of national anger just waiting for a spark. And who stepped right into that chaos? Adolf Hitler. A failed artist, a bitter war veteran, and he knew exactly how to use that public rage. He tried a coup in 1923 that failed, but got him noticed. Then the Great Depression hit, and that chaos pushed him right into the spotlight. By 1933, he was chancellor. He used a fire at the Reichstag, the Prachtwolf building, as an excuse to crush all his rivals, and boom, he had absolute power as the Führer. Now, what was going on internationally was just this tangled mess of deals and promises. You had Britain and France trying to contain Germany, but at the same time they were appeasing Hitler in Munich, basically giving him parts of Czechoslovakia just to avoid another war. Meanwhile, Germany, Italy, and Japan teamed up in an anti-communist alliance, but the real shocker, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The Nazis and the Soviets, sworn enemies, made a deal not to attack each other and secretly agreed to carve out Poland between them. Wild. So, with Germany rearmed and all its political ducks in a row, the storm finally broke over Europe. And it did so with a speed and a force that stunned everyone. The date was September 1st, 1939. Germany faked an attack on one of its own radio stations, blamed it on Poland, and used it as an excuse to invade. Hitler tried to play it off as just a minor police action, to protect Germans. But Britain and France weren't buying it. They declared war, and just like that, World War II had begun. But then, this really weird thing happened. War was declared, but on the Western Front, nothing. It all went quiet. For months, everyone just kind of stared at each other across the border. It got so strange they started calling it the Phony War. Well, that quiet did not last long. In 1940, Germany unleashed its Blitzkrieg, the Lightning War. This was a terrifying new way of fight, using super fast, concentrated tank and air attacks to just punch through enemy lines before they even knew what hit them. The Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, they all fell in days. And then the unthinkable happened. France collapsed. It was a total shock, forcing a desperate, massive evacuation of Allied soldiers from the beaches of Dunkirk. So at this point, the conflict had pretty much swallowed Europe whole. But two massive events were about to happen that would drag the entire planet into this fight, making it a true world war. First, Hitler completely betrayed his deal with Stalin. He launched Operation Barbarossa, a gigantic, three-pronged invasion of the Soviet Union. We're talking three massive army groups, North, Center, and South, just pouring across the border. This opened up the Eastern Front, which would become one of the most brutal theaters of the entire war. The plan was to win in another lightning campaign before the brutal Russian winter could set in. Then, halfway across the world, Germany's ally, Imperial Japan, was on the move. They needed resources, oil, rubber and were building a huge empire across Asia. The biggest threat to their plan? The U.S. Navy. So, on December 7, 1941, they launched a devastating surprise attack on the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The very next day, the United States was officially in the war. You know, by the middle of 1942, it really looked like the Axis powers were unstoppable. Japan controlled this massive Pacific empire, and German troops were pushing deep into Soviet territory. But then, bit by bit, across the entire globe, the tide began to turn in a series of absolutely epic battles. And that's the key thing to remember. The war wasn't won in a single day. It was the series of critical fights that slowly shifted everything. Now, all 5 of these were absolutely crucial, but battles like Stalingrad on the Eastern Front and Midway in the Pacific, they didn't just stop the Axis, they broke their momentum for good. And just look at these numbers for Stalingrad. It gives you a sense of the mind-boggling scale of the slaughter. This wasn't just a defeat for Germany, it was the complete annihilation of their entire 6th Army. This was it. This was the high wire mark for the Nazis. Their push with a vital oil field of the Caucasus was stopped dead. It was a massive psychological blow, and they lost hundreds of thousands of their best soldiers, men they could never replace. So, with the Axis powers now on the back foot in the East, in the Pacific, and in North Africa, the Allies started to coordinate their massive power, tightening the ring from every single direction. For years, the Red Army had been taking the brunt of the punishment from Germany, and the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin was constantly pleading with Roosevelt and Churchill. He had one question over and over: where is the Second Front? When are you going to open a real front in Western Europe to take some of this pressure off of us? And that answer came on June 6, 1944. And what an answer it was. An armada of nearly 7,000 ships, the largest in human history, appeared off the coast of Normandy. The Allies had pulled off this brilliant deception plan, making the Germans think a real landing would be somewhere else, at Calais. The Allies stormed the beaches, and that vital second front was finally open. And while the Allies were pushing from the west, the Soviet war machine in the east was just a juggernaut. Fueled by factories that had been heroically moved beyond the Ural Mountains, the Red Army unleashed one colossal offensive after another. We're talking about advances of 20 to 30 kilometers a day. They were relentlessly crushing German resistance and rolling straight for Berlin. With Allied armies pouring in from the east and the west, the Nazi regime was cornered. Its final days were here. But even though the war in Europe was coming to an end, the global conflict, it wasn't over just yet. In late April of 1945, as the Red Army fought its way into Berlin, Hitler killed himself. Germany surrendered on May 8th, but Japan refused to give up. Then, in August, the United States used a terrifying new weapon, the atomic bomb, dropped on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That unimaginable destruction, combined with the shock of a massive Soviet invasion of Manchuria, finally forced Japan's surrender. The war was over, but the nuclear age had just begun. And the end of the war did way more than just bring peace. It completely redrew the world knot of power. The old European empires, Britain and France, they were shattered. And in their place rose 2 new superpowers with completely opposite ideologies, the United States and the Soviet Union. They were the ones left standing, the dominant forces on the entire planet. So, the world had survived its hottest, most devastating war ever. But this new balance of power and the terrifying reality of the atomic bomb meant that the peace was going to be, well, a very tense one. And so, the end of World War II set the stage for the next great global struggle, a decades-long standoff we call the Cold War.